collaborative bidding can drive innovation in supplier relationships? Kate Fastic is a member of the Faculty of Graduate and Executive Education in the Haslam College of Business at the University of Tennessee. Hi, Kate.
Hello, and glad to be with you again today.
Good to see you. Thank you so much for being with me. Kate, explain what you mean by collaborative bidding as it pertains to the buyer-supplier relationship.
Well, when you think about tendering or bidding or going out to market, it's very much this competitive nature. I mean, it's even in its name. We're going to go to a competitive bid situation. And that doesn't bring out the best in suppliers to come and help you solve your problem. So what we find in our research is that when organizations slow down a little bit and they have more collaborative interactions with their suppliers during the bid process, the suppliers are able to give you a better response on their bid. And that's really the essence of collaborative bidding is instead of this, here's what I need you to do, you go give me an answer. And it's, a buying philosophy, a buy-sell philosophy. You're still using a competitive nature in what you're doing. You're still trying to find the best supplier, but you're doing it in a very collaborative way. So the process is different.
What do you mean by collaborative interactions? What form does that take in terms of working with suppliers toward a mutually agreeable contract?
Well, think of it as a collaborative workshop. In the EU, they actually call them dialogues. There is a law on the books that allows organizations, even the government in the EU can do this. It's called dialogues. And even our governments here can do this as well. So our laws allow us to have dialogues with the suppliers. And so think of it as a workshop. And so we would teach a series of workshops that allow you to have an interchange and get the information, allow that supplier to ask you questions. So one of our first dialogues that we recommend is to really understand common goals and objectives. So for the buyer to explain what their situation and problem is, and for the supplier to be able to ask questions, and then for them to come up with a common shared vision and desired outcomes. What are they trying to do? I like to think of this as their Mount Everest. So when I'm picking a supplier, what is it I want? And I have a funny analogy. I think of it as if the buyer is vodka and each of the suppliers is a different mixer, you're going to get a different answer, right? So vodka mixed with supplier A, which is grapefruit juice, is going to give you a certain cocktail. Mixed with orange juice is going to give you a certain cocktail. And so we want to use these series of dialogues to see which cocktail we like best.
Of course, the concept of bidding implies that what you're doing as a buyer is trying out numerous suppliers for a particular award. So, excuse me. So are you engaging in the so-called collaborative bidding with multiple suppliers at a time before you find the right one?
Yes, they would actually be in parallel. So it's very similar to the way you would do a traditional competitive bid, and that you would have a down select. So let's say you have 8 suppliers and you down select to 3. Very common then in our bid process, we would have, go from a very large pool to a smaller pool. So when you get typically about 3, it takes more time if you have 5, but when you get to about 3, sometimes it's 2, sometimes it's 3, sometimes it might be 4. Then you want to go on parallel streams. So you're going to have these workshops with supplier A, the same exact workshop with supplier B, the same exact workshops with supplier C. And this is when your vodka is going to start to mix with that supplier different. So you want to be able to have, make sure in your original down select that you're selecting capable suppliers, right? So that first down select wave is for capabilities. So you now know that information, the suppliers are all capable or they wouldn't be there. Now I'm going to be looking for their solution and their cultural fit.
Any reluctance on the part of suppliers to reveal certain proprietary information prior to confirming a contract with a buyer?
I love this question. I'm so glad you asked it. So we would actually teach that the questions to the supplier are proprietary. And so when the supplier is asking you questions during these workshops, you're answering those, you're having this interactive dialogue. Those questions are not shared with the other suppliers that are in their own track.
Hmm.
And what you find is when the buyer puts that, statement out there that we aren't sharing your information, all of a sudden the suppliers start asking great questions. Because in a
Hmm.
traditional bid process, we don't have these dialogues, and the supplier will send an email, or you'll be on a call with all the suppliers. You'll have a big Q&A call with all the suppliers. Suppliers don't want to ask their questions. They're good questions, because their good questions tip their hand to their competitive advantage.
Sure.
And so I think about it, it's almost like this race. The suppliers get out of the gate all even. And in the dialogues, the ones that have better questions get answers and have a better solution. So now all the suppliers, they're like racing. It's a horse race. The better your questions, the more you start to gel, the better the solution, the better the fit.
So you have an interesting combination of collaboration and competitiveness, which of course the latter being absolutely necessary by its very nature in the bidding process, and yet this aspect of collaboration really kind of powers that to a new level. To what extent, Kate, is this actually happening out there in the world of buyers and suppliers versus what you are advocating should be happening?
Well, I think I love technology, but technology has actually made us go away from common sense sometimes.
What do you
I
mean?
laugh. So some of the technology that's out there for bids to make bidding processes easier. I have a joke, but it's like, all right, so the supplier gets a 42 line 42 characters to put in their Twitter answer,
Mm,
or their X answer as it is now.
yeah.
And so I think what's happened is in our quest for efficiencies, we've gone away from having discussions with our supplier. And so this is bringing us back to where we are and actually taking it to a whole new level. So you ask, how often do we see this? We don't see it too often. We do see in some industries, for example, facilities management outsourcing, they have a thing called a yellow pad session, and it's a little 3 or 4 hour yellow pad. But that's not really what we're teaching. We're teaching something much more than that.
Hmm.
But we are seeing people adopt it. One of the first adopters actually was the Canadian government. And they came to us, Vancouver Coastal Health, and said, I love the idea of getting to a vested agreement. As you know, I teach the concept of highly collaborative win-win
Sure.
relationships, but we have to go through a bid process. So we actually worked with them. We looked at the laws that they had on the books, and we said, look, your laws enable you to have these more collaborative ways of working. So that was the first time we'd actually been working with industry to craft the process. The next instance was in Sweden, with EY was doing a bid, and they said, they really want to get to a vested agreement, but how do we do this where you can look at the solution and look at the supplier's cultural fit? And so we streamlined the process a bit more. And then we kept piloting it. We had about 10 organizations that pilot it, and we developed a white paper. And today that white paper is in the Creative Commons. Anyone can pick it up. It's on our website. I'll share it with you guys if you want to have folks download. So the process is out there for people to adopt. And we are seeing people adopt it, especially this is one reason why we make our work open source and put it in the Creative Commons. We want to encourage them to be
Hmm.
exposed to new ideas.
Everything you've told me in this conversation today, Kate, seems to imply human to human contact. And yet you also mentioned technology as maybe being kind of seducing us into thinking that that is the answer. Does technology, does AI, does analytics have a place in this determination of the best supplier, or is it really at base always going to be a human determination?
I think it's both, right? Why can't you have the power of and? So think about
Mm,
it if you're looking at the capabilities. So you can have this big pool of suppliers that's going through answering questions on capabilities. You can have AI check some of that, right? But when you get down to that final, the solutioning, here's my problem, here's the solution, the cultural fit that we want. That's when you have to mix the human back in. And so it's not either or. I think it's both.
yeah. You have long advocated for much deeper relationships between suppliers and buyers, even though we are still in a largely transactional environment in many cases. I'm buying services. I want the lowest price I could possibly get. That's still got to be a consideration. So this is probably a conversation for another day, maybe, or an entire course that you teach. But how then in today's environment do we balance the need? Truly, we got to get the best cost possible, but we've also got to go deeper as you're describing. It seems like a constant seesaw or constant balance. Is that the case?
Yes, but I think when you look at it, and I use an analogy of P&G, they have 80,000 suppliers. They
Mm.
can't always have deep relationships with all 80,000 suppliers. So we have actually one of our books, it is this one right here. Uh, so it's
Okay.
backwards behind me, right?
Hmm.
Strategic sourcing and economy. We introduced the concept of a sourcing continuum. And it goes from highly transactional to highly strategic. And there are attributes. There's a business model mapping toolkit, also open source. Anyone who wants to come to our dedicated website can download that. There's an open source toolkit. And it helps people determine which sourcing business model is the best fit. So when we use collaborative bidding, it's for those relationships that are more strategic. So a lot of times procurement would call suppliers a basic, approved, or preferred supplier, or if we have a performance-based agreement. When I want to use the term strategic or preferred or a performance-based agreement or a vested agreement, that's when I want to shift to collaborative bidding, when the relationship can create a competitive advantage for us. So that would mean the majority of our suppliers are still going to be transactional. Absolutely perfectly fine to use automated RFP processes to use to pick that supplier when we have a strict commodity. There is no differentiator. But you think about third-party logistics services or facilities management or labor services. A lot of what we're doing on these more strategic outsourcing deals, there is a service component, a human component, a solution component that's going to create that competitive advantage.
Okay, fantastic. University of Tennessee. It's always a pleasure speaking with you on this critical issue of supplier-buyer relationships and the whole notion of collaborative bidding. Thanks so much for being with me today.
Thanks for having me.